Welcome everybody. We're just having a little bit of a technical issue this morning, no worries. So wanted to thank you all for joining us again. It's our 6th Krembil coffee break session. And again, we love doing these sessions for you, Twain and I, and teaching you a little bit about what we know about science communication and design and photography and all the things that can help you spread the word about your amazing research and really just, help you get the word out about what it is that you're working on. So we thought we would try something a little bit different today. We're calling it a wildcard QA. We've asked you for some questions in advance, and we assume that there will be new questions as we go. So we're going to be doing this on the fly today, but that's kind of exciting for us. And we're just going to start off with a really quick overview. Just repeating a slide from a few sessions ago that I thought really resonated with a lot of you, and it's just this idea that science achieves little if it stays in the lab, which is a quote that we saw from a Nature Jobs blog, and really sets the tone for what we're talking about today and what we talk about every week, which is, again, taking the work and the research and everything that you're doing and sharing it widely and sharing it proudly to the greater community. We thought we would just quickly do a 411 on UHN Public Affairs to remind many of you what it is that Public Affairs does and how we can help you in this regard. So just running through a couple of quick things. We help you set communication goals. We help you develop key messages in order to promote your high impact research. We help you translate complex science into plain language, which is probably the most important part, as that is the way to engage a wider community and a wider audience. We help you identify the most effective ways to engage in both internal and external public outreach. So that's, publicizing within UHN what is going on in your lab and with your teams, and also reaching out to media and other types of public outreach. We help you celebrate the accomplishments and milestones of your team, which I know many of you are very interested in. There's a lot of different ways that we do this through public affairs. There's something called UHN on the go. There's, of course, UHN News. There's something called the honor roll. And so these are all different ways that we have to help you talk about some of those accomplishments and some of the milestones of the members of your team and your team as a whole. We help you pitch, prepare for, and coordinate media, the logistics of media stories. So we'll talk about this as we go on because there's a specific question about it. Not every story is necessarily something that media would be interested in. Not every story can be pitched to media, but we help you understand when that's the right thing to do. And once you get the confirmation that a media representative is going to come, we can help you prepare, coordinate the logistics of a camera coming on site, not right now, obviously, but generally, or right now, Zoom calls and things like that. We also help you navigate the social media world. So that includes ideas about design, creative content that you can use, the best way to go forward in terms of, again, sharing your work more broadly. So just heading to the next slide, wanted to remind everyone about Twain and I, that we are the Krembil Public Affairs team. I just wanted to recap a little bit. We've met many of you, but we haven't met all of you. So I'll ask Twain in just a second to jump in. I just wanted to give you a quick update about my background. I have been a journalist for many years, mostly working in television and doing some freelance writing for print. So I've spent the majority of my early career in media. So based on that, I have a lot of friends who still work in the media, but I also feel like I have a really good handle on what interests media and what does not interest media. So in that sense, I've been working on understanding news stories and news angles, and I do tend to have that instinct about kind of what will work and what won't. It also gives me good insight into storytelling and understanding what kind of storytelling options might work in different venues. So whether it's UHN news story, or if it's a television news story, essentially what they're looking for and what might resonate with media, or what might resonate with whoever it is that wants to promote your research. So Twain, if you want to jump in and just remind everybody about your background as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Heather. So I joined public affairs last year. My background is in neuroscience and cell biology. So I did my undergrad and my studies at U of T. I kind of picked up photography and videography in my undergrad, and I found a way to sort of make that into a career in science communication, which is sort of the best of both worlds for me, which is my love for science and my love for being creative and visually creative. So my main goal on public affairs is to really create graphics, create visuals, videos, photos. So a lot of the stuff you'll see either on our Twitter, our Instagram, or even our YouTube, I will sort of coordinate with sort of Heather as, you know, a producer, helping me kind of shape the story. And I'm sort of responsible for the visual aspect within Krembil for public affairs.
Awesome, thank you. So Twain and I work closely together and have complementary skill sets. And so together we're really looking to elevate the promotion of research at UHN and specifically Krembil. So just heading over to the next slide, I just wanted to quickly put this out there. Many of you enjoyed the cartoon from the first science communication seminar. This is a cartoonist called the Upturned Microscope. He is a former cell biologist turned science communicator and cartoonist. And just take a moment to read this over. It's really the basis of what we talk about in most of these sessions and what we basically do every day. So I hope you enjoyed that. That was just a little fun to lighten things up, and let me know if you like these cartoons. I've sent out a link previously, but I can send out a link in the next tip sheet as well. Okay, so just very quickly, we just wanted to remind everyone that today is a wildcard Q&A. That means that we have some questions to start with, but if you have questions yourself, we will ask you to go to the Slido, which we'll put up a board in just a second with all the information. And or you can put your questions in the chat, and we've got Carly and Amy helping us to moderate today. A couple of quick examples of questions to ask. Do you have an upcoming presentation? You're not sure how to tell a story? Do you think your upcoming paper, might interest media, but you're not really sure how to proceed or what to do? Or have you been wondering which types of visuals are best to help explain your research on social media? So those are sort of the examples of some types of questions that we'll be talking about today, but if you have other questions, please feel free to add them and we'll try to address as many as we can. Okay, so that's it for the slides. If we can put up the Slido board with all the information for everybody to be able to input their questions, that would be awesome. And I think Carly is going to help us moderate, and Twain and I are standing by to answer questions.
That's great. Thanks so much for opening that up. I was just going to go into the chat, which has just disappeared for me, but there was a suggestion by Karen indicating that perhaps in a future session we can have Twain talk a little bit more about what allowed him to sort of move, or what led to his movement from instead of continuing in academia and sort of moving on to the next degree, instead going into science communication and sort of rolling that out about different career paths for individuals who may not want to continue on in their current path. So that was just a suggestion. Sure. But so here we go on to Slido. We do have a few questions already that are up on the website. And so I'm just going to go in order based on the ranking as they are bumped up. And we'll see if we can get to everything. Otherwise, you can pop some additional questions into the chat and we can move to that afterwards. So this one I'm going to submit to Heather. And the first one is, how far in advance do I need to let public affairs know about an impactful publication?
Okay, great question. I'm so glad that that somebody's asking, because this comes up a lot. What I normally ask is that a researcher will loop us in around the stage when a final proof is accepted. We keep everything obviously very confidential. So if you send us the final proof, it just gives us a sense of what the story is about. We'll be able to help you understand whether it's something that might appeal to media, and if so, what the next steps would be. Sometimes, you know, papers are things that we like to feature on UHN News. A lot of media is actually watching UHN News, and especially UHN and UHN Research social media handles. So if things go out, we get a lot of requests through social media. I would say like a good 2 weeks before is ideal. That usually aligns with the acceptance of the final proof before publication. And the other part of that is that oftentimes there's not a lot of notice when it comes to publication. And so I know that depending on the journal, sometimes you find out that it's been accepted and it's published, within a matter of days. So everything's a bit of a juggle. It's really good for us to know kind of as far in advance as possible, just even to be able to have a conversation with you, to understand the research and understand the impact from there.
Great, thank you so much. Just to add on to that, I know that there are often questions about if something is embargoed, Heather. Sometimes individuals are hesitant to share that. Can you comment on that from the public affairs perspective?
Yes, absolutely. There's quite often an embargo, and how it works is, obviously we will keep the embargo. The media that we work with regularly, what I meant to say is we work with certain media regularly. We work with, the health reporters at all the major newspapers and websites and television broadcasters. We trust them because they have not broken embargoes very often, if at all. So how it generally works is that we would let a reporter or we would send out a press release in advance. Oftentimes we don't send out a press release widely in advance. We might send it to one or two reporters with the understanding that they will keep the embargo. So even today, I'm going to be putting up a press release on a site called Eureka Alert with a very strict embargo date, and so it won't come out until that date. So what it comes down to is trust, and the media that we work with regularly, we do trust. If we get a request from a reporter or a journalist that we don't work with regularly, that we're not too sure about their organization, we won't send it to them in advance, and nothing would ever be sent in advance without your permission. But just know that it is common practice to be able to give media a heads up about things coming out, because they need time to prepare just like we need time to prepare. And especially when it comes to health and research and science, they definitely need time to prepare and get their stories ready, because they don't want to be late on it. So the problem is if we don't give them things under embargo, most of the time they just won't cover it. Or if they do, it would be a very minor story on the web versus a feature on CTV National. So everybody wants to be on top of these stories. They want to be able to say a new study out today.
Excellent, thanks so much. So the next one I'm going to send over to Twain. So the question is, where do you even start with an infographic? With the words or with the pictures?
That's a great question. I'm actually going to share one of my slides from the infographic presentation that I did give. So I'll just put that up really quick. Can you guys see that? Can everyone see that slide there?
Yes.
Perfect. So when I went over the presentation, I believe 2 or 3 weeks ago, I sort of kind of broke it down into a bit of a triangle where we can sort of ask ourselves questions. And these questions are supposed to help you decide on the copy, which is essentially the text of your infographic. So ideally, the biggest question you're trying to answer is whatever the large scale problem is. Say that, your research paper is trying to solve. And then you have your supporting questions and probing questions. So I kind of gave an example of this with sort of the SARS-CoV vaccine situation. Now, each of these, you can sort of formulate 1 or 2 lines. And I think doing the text first is more important, because that way you can kind of have it guide your visuals and be a little more calculated and organized with what you're showing. So as a quick example, you can represent any one of these questions into an infographic, and you can sort of, answer these questions fairly easily with, 1 or 2 lines, and then develop a visual for it. Personally, for me, I work that way. I know some people might, like to put a pen to paper and get drawing and create a visual first before the text. But I find once I've got the text and my key messaging, I think that's important, because, once you've got your key messaging and the right message you want to send, then you can sort of develop the appropriate visual to accompany that. So that would sort of be my preference. But like I said, some people work differently, and, to each their own. But for me, I like to get the text first, then the visual.
Great, thank you. So this next one I'm going to throw to Heather. How do you know if reporters would be interested in a story?
Thank you. So that is the million-dollar question. It often happens that there is a story that we do think is going to resonate with people, with reporters, and then they don't pick it up. And I'll just give you a really quick example. And this ended up coming full circle, but we had a study come out, I think about a year and a half ago. Dr. Weaver had a study coming out about the a compound in coffee, phenylindane, and its impact on reducing your chances of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And in my mind, I thought, okay, this is huge. You know, we're going to be inundated by media. This is crazy. Now, we found out about the paper sort of a little bit after the fact, so we were playing a little bit of catch up. So we did a press release and a story and sent it out to, you know, all the local media. And I was actually shocked that I got very little response. And so we sent out the press release on this news posting site called Eureka Alert. And I would say within 24 hours, we were inundated by all of this international media. And to this day, we're still getting requests occasionally for Dr. Weaver, or a request to talk about the study, or we're seeing it being featured on social media. So in that case, really no rhyme or reason. I still to this day can't figure out why local media didn't pick it up. The only thing I can think of is that we did let them know about it after the fact. So the study had already come out. And, you know, in their mind, they thought it was, I guess, the time had passed. But for international media, you know, it just blew up. And I think we had, you know, 60,000 notifications on Google, and it was quite crazy. Anyway, all this to say, if your story is something that is relatable, if it's something that will impact patient care now or in the future, if it's something, you know, sorry, I'm going to backtrack and say, you know, different media is different. So for example, a print reporter, maybe somebody from the Globe and Mail or Toronto Star, if there aren't a lot of visuals, they may still be interested in a story if, you know, the compelling part of the story is talking about the scientists themselves and what they're working on, and if there are a couple of visuals. But for television, you absolutely need visuals to tell a story. So that would be an interview, that might be some images, that might be some B-roll or behind the scenes footage of that person working in the lab. So all of those things actually matter when you pitch to media. But how do you really know if reporters will be interested? You speak to public affairs and have a conversation with us about it. And we're usually a really good gauge of whether something is at least pitchable, or whether you should wait. Oftentimes there's a study coming out, but you have another study coming out in, you know, 2 or 3 months that builds on the previous study. And we might suggest to you that it might be a good idea to wait. We had a paper come out just recently about the impact of a Mozart sonata on reducing seizure frequency in epilepsy patients. And we did have some interest from local media, but then we put out a press release, and we've again been inundated by international media. So the truth is, you never 100% know what's going to resonate, but public affairs is your first stop, a conversation with us. And we can also help put it in perspective as well. And Amy, if you're able to help me bring up one of the slides from earlier, I just wanted to go through and just remind people about the checklist for media pitches. Okay, so keep going, forward, forward, forward. Keep going, keep going. Perfect. Okay, this is from a recent session that we did, but I just want to remind everybody that these are the things that media is looking for. They want to know, what did you find? How significant is it? Especially if it's a world first. I mean, that's pretty likely they're going to be interested. What I mean by was it unexpected is, were you looking for one thing and did you happen to discover something else? Were you testing a repurposed drug for one thing, or were you testing a drug that was meant for cancer and did you find that it actually had impact on something else? And how could these findings impact patient care? When you're working in research, it may not impact patient care for many, many years, but the intention is that that's what you're doing, is that your research will eventually benefit patients. So you have to try to make that connection. Visual, super important. And finally, you know, whether there's a patient that's willing to be interviewed, especially for television media, but even for print and online media, also very important. If we just go one slide further, Amy. And these are just some quick tips. Once you are actually talking to media, just wanted to remind everyone about crafting those key points. Again, that's something public affairs can help you with, and really, really important. And just doing a run through, taking a deep breath before you talk to reporters, repeating the question and the answer, super important. So when they say to you, you know, how will this impact patients? You say, this, one day we hope this will impact, you know, one day we hope the patients will benefit from our research by this, this, and this. Or whatever they ask you, you repeat the question and your answer. That way you make everything that you're saying pretty much a soundbite. And they'll still have to sift through and choose what works for them for the story, but they definitely have more to work with. Using plain language and using analogies, super important. That's something you can think about in advance, and that will always help, especially when pitching media. Even in the pitch, when we use an analogy to help it relate to them, it really helps. And just keeping your answers short and succinct. So that's the answer.
Great. Okay, so this next one's from Michael. So using animations in our scientific presentations is often not appreciated by peers. It does not look scientific, in quotations. What would be the right balance? Not sure if you'd both like to take this or someone for the lead.
I guess I'll start off. I think there needs to be sort of a bit of a distinction between animations and graphics. When I think of animations, I think of like text dropping down and you know, text flying in Microsoft PowerPoint or something like that. And I agree, yes, that does look distracting if you're trying to animate things like that. I think animations can play a role if they're done right. And, you know, animations do take some time to create, and I think, you know, you really have to know what you're doing in terms of, you know, creating that type of animation, whether you do it with code or in an editor or an animation engine. But if we're talking graphics, I think that's a different story, where say you can take a really complicated set of data and sort of boil it down into, you know, 1 to 2 to 3 graphics that sort of is easily relatable and easily understandable to your audience. And that's going to depend on your audience as well. You know, if you're purely presenting to an academic audience, you know, you might want to just take your charts from your research paper. But say you're giving a presentation to donors, you might want to opt for something that's a little easier to digest, an infographic that might have, you know, some more visually pleasing characteristics. So I think, you know, the distinction has to be between, you know, animation in terms of, you know, what are you doing with, say, certain elements of your presentation, versus graphics, which is how you're displaying your results and your findings and things like that. I think animations, like I said, if you can do it well, great. If you find that it's too distracting, it likely will be. And then graphics, which is supposed to be informative and relatable and easy to understand, which I would say you should opt for and use in your presentations.
I'll just add to that, because that was a great explanation, that there's, you know, it really comes down to storytelling. And you're right. I mean, you know, in the scientific realm, maybe people are not, when you're speaking to your colleagues, maybe they're not as open. They're just, you know, people are used to a certain format until they can get used to another format. So, you know, I looked at things like TED Talks, which really uses imagery more than graphs and charts and things like that. We mentioned in a past session, but I'll just remind everyone about our Science in the Six event that we held last October, in which we worked with UHN researchers to do sort of a TED Talk type presentation, a 3-minute talk. And there are several examples. There's Stephanie Protz from Toronto General McEwen. She used, you know, amazing graphic of beating hearts, and that's part of her research that she works on. Shane Harding, who's a cancer researcher at Princess Margaret, it took a while to get to the graphics that he ended up using in order to use an analogy to talk about how cancer attacks the body. So I would, and we can put this in a resource sheet that we send out to everybody, but I would highly encourage everyone to watch Science in the Six and watch the talks and presentations by each of the scientists, because we took all of these thoughts, and we sort of helped work with them to be able to put it together into a short presentation that might inspire some of you, even when you're speaking to your scientific colleagues, and especially when you're speaking to more lay audiences like the public or potential donors.
Excellent, thank you both. Our next question is also from Michael. I'm going to send this one to Twain. The question is, how do you make your lab website more dynamic, more interacting, more engaging? Any particular approach or recommendation?
That's a great question. Lab websites, I think, you kind of have free reign in terms of creativity. I don't have a lot of experience with Wix or GoDaddy, but I do have experience with Squarespace, and I find Squarespace does have a lot of room. They all have templates that you can build off of, and I think with the lab websites, you're likely, you want to showcase your research, and likely there might be a lot of text, but you want to complement that text with some imagery from your lab. You want to tell the story about your team and why you're researching what you're doing. So you could convey that, on your website as well. In terms of something more engaging, I would say, try and fill that with imagery that talks about your research, whether it be cool, things from the lab, whether it be equipment, any cell imaging. If you do that kind of stuff, people like that kind of stuff. It looks cool, I think. And in terms of sort of layout and stuff like that, like I said, there's a lot of templates, and I think Squarespace has the option to inject code. So you can use CSS and I think HTML code and really format things to the way you want, which offers some customizability within the sort of web hosting service. I think that would probably be sort of my best tips. I don't have a lot of experience in website design, but I think if you can make things flow, easy to understand, and keep people's eyes on the page for as long as possible, that's the ultimate goal. And that's how you'll know your website's engaging for sure.
Great, thank you. This next question, I believe this will be for Heather. How do we know what we can say and what we can't to media? For example, can we refer to a patient's case without mentioning any name?
Great question. This is something that people don't really, consider. We all know that patient health information is confidential, and that's a huge priority at UHN, that we keep patient information confidential. What happens occasionally is that maybe there's a research paper, or maybe there's a particular patient case which the doctor, the clinician, or the researcher is very excited to talk to media about, because it's something that's very unique, or it's something that went really well. And so we've had several people approach media directly without going through public affairs. So number one, the guideline and the rule at UHN is that public affairs really needs to be involved when anyone is pitching to media. And there's a reason for that, especially when patients are involved. So we need to be the ones to consent patients, because oftentimes patients may not be comfortable saying no to their clinician or to a researcher that they've been working with, whereas they will be comfortable saying no to public affairs, and they need to have that option. So all of that is a precursor to say that because of also rules in Ontario, legal rules and things like that, we cannot release any patient information without a signed consent form. So even if someone is talking about a patient case where they're not identifying the patient, but they're speaking about their specific case, as long as that patient can identify that they're the ones being talked about, even if their name is not being used, that is not okay. So we actually do need to get patient consent, even for anyone to discuss their case anonymously. This has come up several times and was actually a big learning for me. But really important to know that if you do feel that you're working on something, or that you have had a patient case that is very worthy of media attention, you always have to come through public affairs, and it's a good thing. So we can help you connect and liaise with media, but we also are the front line when it comes to patients and speaking to them and making sure that they know that they have no obligation to tell their story, that it won't in any way affect their patient care. But they need to know that, and they need to fully understand that, that a consent form needs to be signed before we can even speak to media about their story. And sometimes that's frustrating, because sometimes that's the crux on which a story might hinge, the patient's story, but it really doesn't matter. If a patient is involved, we have to be involved as well.
Okay. So this next question is actually one of several questions. It was sort of written out in a couple of different sections, but it does relate to, oh, and I just clicked it. It does relate to online presentations for conferences. I'm going to see if I can get that back. And this individual, Renata, is just asking, what's the best way to present online if you're having a poster presentation? Do you do a video? Do you put up a PowerPoint? Some individuals have chosen Prezi as a way to present their work. Is there really a best option, and what are the areas to be considered?
I think maybe Twain can speak to this in a moment, but I think this is also a really good opportunity for everyone else who's watching right now to weigh in, because maybe some of the people that are with us today, some of the participants, also have opinions on what works best when it comes to highlighting parts of the post, or what works best in these scientific venues. Twain, you want to talk to Prezi?
Sure. I've seen people use Prezi before. In my undergrad, in our fourth year, upper year courses, I think out of all our groups in our seminar courses, definitely use Prezi to present a research paper. And it can be great because you can really present the data and show graphs and charts and all the different experiments that have gone into that research paper to showcase the study. I don't think I've used Prezi outside of that. I just find myself more comfortable with other slideshow applications like Adobe Illustrator or Microsoft PowerPoint. But if that's something you're comfortable with, and if I would say use it. I would also sort of caution, because some of the animations can get a bit distracting and might distract from your overall message. So I'd just be sort of cautious about how you use Prezi and some of the animations and transitions if you were to use it, and don't let that distract from your main message.
So I'm just going to jump in here right now. Michael has added a comment in our side chat bar, and he has suggested that PowerPoint 2016 has a lot of Zoom functions similar to Prezi. So it sounds like that could also be an option.
That's very interesting. I think.
Excellent. Well, thank you. This next question is, are there ways to deal with debunking fake news? What would be appropriate to answer if we get challenged by people and their beliefs? Heather, did you want to take this one?
To take this one. I saw this one on the Slido, and it really resonated, because this is something that comes up a lot, especially with a lot of our people working in research who are on social media. And especially when you're talking about science and putting science out there, you're bound to get some people who don't agree with you. You're bound to get some people who are very vocal about their disagreement. And it's really hard because you don't know what to do. And often I get questions or queries from people wondering, how should I handle this? So there's a couple of things. When it comes, there's two different streams. One is if you as a UHN researcher are putting something out and someone is coming back and questioning you, or in a very strong language, they are responding to you and you don't feel comfortable responding. So number one, especially if it's a patient or anything patient related, we have UHN patient relations. They handle those situations. So if you're ever not comfortable responding, and you should really consider before you respond, and if it's anything patient related or patient facing, you should definitely let UHN patient relations know about it, and they will follow up with that person. So that's one stream. But we're talking about sort of fake news. We're in the era of COVID, and especially now, conspiracies and fake news and things like that. It's sort of front and center. And so how do you handle it if you put something out about your research and somebody calls you on it and says that that's fake news, and how do you handle it? So interestingly enough, there was a great opinion piece in the Toronto Star this morning by Professor Timothy Caulfield, who is a health law professor out of University of Alberta and really highly respected in sort of the health media scene. He's often debunking fake news. That's kind of his thing. And so I took a few notes to talk about it because I think it's really important that there's certain things, when we talk about shaming people on social media. So if they come out and if they're coming out and talking about fake news as being real, shaming never works. Saying to somebody, you're just wrong, just shuts down a conversation. So engaging people is the best way to go if you feel comfortable, but it's still a tricky situation. So some of his suggestions that and I can send this out in the resources tip sheet that we send out later, is to highlight the scientific consensus. So rather than coming back to someone and just saying, this is the way it is, or here's one research paper that proves you wrong, it's important to highlight that something is a consensus in the scientific community if it is. Also, your tone is really important and the words that you use. For example, he suggests using the words we and us versus I and you. And sometimes that can be a little bit more, it can essentially put a spin on it that's negative in tone, as opposed to, us and we, and making it more cyclical that way. He also says, provide clear and straightforward, shareable content. So make sure that what you put out there is a link that can be opened and can be seen by other people, or that it's a graphic, or that it's an infographic, or something that can be seen and shared by other people, as opposed to just words. Avoid scientific jargon. This is something that comes up obviously with us a lot, but especially if you're trying to appeal to a lot of people in the public and in the community, you definitely want to avoid scientific jargon and use plain language and engaging, compelling language that people can understand and that they feel comfortable sharing. Be humble. So this again goes to the idea of tone, and rather than taking sort of a derogatory tone, taking a more humble tone and using the us and we versus I and you, and going that route. And then he really suggests, and this goes to what Twain was talking about, using creative communication strategies. So that's graphics, that's videos, that's infographics, that's ways to engage people visually on a topic that's very hard to digest in words and scientifically. So it's hard. And I think you really have to know where the line is in terms of whether you respond, and if you do respond, how you respond. I suggest it's really good to run it by someone, whether it's a colleague or public affairs, if you're really not sure how to proceed. And again, just the reminder that if there's anything patient facing, it really should go through patient relations. You should not be dealing with that directly. And that's their job, is to talk to people and to speak to patients and make sure that everyone is heard and listened to. So I will send out that link, as I mentioned, later in the resources and tip sheet to Professor Caulfield's opinion piece in the Toronto Star today, but it's really good with lots of great info on how to handle these situations.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So this next question is once again about lab websites, and I'm going to send this over to Twain, but I think that it's really applicable for any platform. So here's the question. Could a video be made from a PowerPoint presentation as a good option to tell about the science on a lab website? If so, what is the ideal duration?
That's a great question. I'll sort of refer back to Science in the Six, and what we did with Science in the Six with each of the UHN researchers was we basically did what we call vignettes, which is sort of a 1 to 2 minute, I guess, presentation or sort of an interview with them about their work, what led them to their work. And I think you could definitely do that with a presentation. And even with the paper, you can kind of create that, telling the story of, your research in that vein. Also, what we do at Krembil is Krembil Minutes to our YouTube, on our YouTube website. I'll actually pull that up here. Give me 1 second and I'll share the screen. And I'll sort of show you what a Krembil minute looks like, and it's pretty straightforward. And what you can do is really make your paper, your research paper, really digestible and easy to understand. Here, just pull this up here. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Perfect. So this is basically what a Krembil minute looks like, which is, you have some visuals, whether it be, a photo, either, of your lab, or even a free stock photo that you guys, can find on the internet. And, you have some text across the screen, just like that kind of explains it in lay language. And that can be a great way of conveying, your research paper or the research that you do in your lab in 1 to 2 minutes without even getting in front of a camera if that's not something you're comfortable with, right? So you can create these little vignettes or minutes, as Heather and I like to call them, to showcase your research. And it's easily digestible and easily shareable. So you can send this off to media, you can send it off to your friends, your family, your colleagues, and they can get a snapshot of what your work is about and what your research is about.
It's also great for mobile viewing too, since most people are
Yes.
looking at things on their phones, in other times in transit. So it's great to have the words on screen. I think it just makes it more, it opens it up to more people.
Perfect. So check out our YouTube channel and you'll see plenty of options there.
Yeah.
Excellent. I think this next one will be for both of you. So the question is, how do you decide whose work you feature? When we see features in the media, is that public affairs pitching to media or media approaching us? And I think that this will also extend to our social platforms.
Yeah, okay, I can start and Twain can pick it up. It's a little bit of both. I mean, oftentimes I will get a call from media. More often I'm calling them or emailing them or letting them know about things. So how do we decide whose work to feature? If you're talking about specifically, there's different streams here as well, like who gets, whose stories get featured on UHN News versus which stories get featured in the media. Again, when we talked a little bit about it earlier, but when it comes to media, they're looking for, really high impact stories that ideally have a patient element or that are patient facing. There has to be some element of why it matters to people now usually for media to be able to feature the work, or just some really unique element about the research itself, or again, whether it came by accident, somebody finding this out. So research is notoriously hard to get media attention for, and that's because oftentimes it's something that doesn't have immediate impact. Usually it's something that doesn't have immediate impact. And also the visuals are challenging. And so Twain and I are actually working on that and trying to get more footage behind the scenes of different labs and things that we can provide to media that are cleared when they do a story on research, so that we can say to them, here's some visuals of this lab, and here's some great generic lab footage that you can use as well. When it comes to UHN News, I mean, there's obviously a little bit more leeway. We work at UHN in public affairs like a newsroom. So there's an editor, and we pitch to that editor. His name is Daniel Gerard, and he worked for the Toronto Star for almost 25 years. So he's got a lot of editorial experience. And, sometimes we are successful in getting our stories pitched to UHN News. And sometimes there may not be enough there for a full story, but it's something that we definitely want to highlight. And then there are these different options, like, for example, UHN on the Go is a great place to put stories that may not have sort of the news angle that we like to have in a UHN News story, but it's something that we want to show and highlight about something that's gone on at UHN. So there's so many different options. Again, there's honor roll, and that's to talk about different accomplishments and milestones. Especially awards. So there's so many different ways to highlight what it is that you're working on and what you want to promote. It's not always media, and it's not always UHN News. So the best advice I would give to you is to, again, talk to public affairs. Tell them what it is, what you're hoping for, and then work with public affairs to find the best venue to help you.
Great, and I think I'll just ask Twain to weigh in as well. I know that he's often working on a lot of creative content around the awareness months, and then also for our YouTube and Instagram, which also relays over to Twitter.
Yeah, so in terms of social media, we sort of feature a lot of great things. And I think I try to align with, at least for Instagram and Twitter, we try to align each platform in terms of what we're promoting so that you can kind of see, we capture different audiences with the same sort of research news and things like that. For me, I think, with Instagram, people tend to like things that are visually interesting, but we also like to feature, people and awards and new research by, different research groups. And, at Krembil, we have 3 pillars, and we try to represent all 3 of those pillars equally with their great research that they do. And so I find, social media, it can be a bit hard to navigate, but regardless, we want to feature, new findings and new things do well. And I think that's sort of the, you can kind of capture that in social media. It's instant, it's relatable, and you kind of get a big response and big engagement from, the public with, some of the new research that does come out. But like I said, we like to keep things, we like to spread the love across all 3 of our pillars. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Perfect.
Carly, sorry, just before we move on, I just wanted to add one thing, because Twain brought up, or you brought up health promotion days or awareness days. These are really great opportunities for us too, both internally and externally. So for example, sorry, my daughter, no. A couple of years ago, we've got Dr. Jim Eubanks, and he works on, Rett syndrome and CDKL5, some considered a rare disease. So end of February is always a rare disease day. And so we pitched media. We pitched CTV Local on a story about Jim's research. There's a family that he works with, and they were willing to be interviewed, and it turned out to be an amazing story that they had a lot of great feedback for. So there was no paper necessarily that it was tied to. It was really just a story about Jim and his work that's going on in his lab through the eyes of a family who is dealing with this. And so it was another great opportunity to take advantage of one of those health promotion or awareness days.
Perfect. I was also just going to add that it's often what we're aware of as well. So share your photos with public affairs at your sites at Krembil, and share that content. It doesn't always have to be a publication. It could be an interesting photo. And that's a great way to sort of provide a hook as well.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, that's great, because a lot of media likes to see behind the scenes. I know Heather had touched upon it in a previous presentation where people sort of see scientists as elitists, but we're also human too. We do have lives outside of research, and some people can connect with that. And then next thing you know, they're interested in your research. So any photo that has a media pull, a draw, a connection, or sort of makes that connection with a large audience, that's also great as well.
Yeah, I would just remind people though that when you are, even if you have a personal social media account, if you're posting as a UHN scientist or researcher or anyone connected to UHN, you're representing UHN. So definitely, think about that when you're thinking about your posts and what you're posting and what kinds of photos you're posting, and just have that in mind as well.
Perfect. Okay, we've got one last question and then another side comment in the chat. And then we'll probably be wrapping it up after this. So last question on Slido. And Heather, I think I'll start with you. So the question is, many research articles are published at journals with paywalls for access. Where is the line on what we can discuss on free media platforms from these articles?
This is a really great question, and I'm going to need to do some research to find out exactly where things stand on this. But it's true, it is a problem. There are paywalls for journals. There are paywalls for different media sites. There are some things that we have access to at UHN, but even this morning something came up where we had coverage in a couple of British media sites that we do not have access to. So that's a problem. So I don't have a great answer on this. I think I do agree that it's a big problem and that we need to be able to, understand what we should be discussing on these platforms. And you need to be able to provide a link that people can link to and see what your paper is all about. So I'm going to do a little bit of research on this and ideally have something to provide in the tips and resources sheet that I send out later.
Okay, great. So the last thing I have here is in the chat, and Michael has asked, could you tell us exactly what is Science in the Six? And I see that Amy has now provided a link to the full event.
Yeah, I'm happy to start and then Twain can pick it up too. Science in the Six was a beast in the best way, It started from an idea that we had based on a pitch competition that we held for trainees and students. And we wanted them to craft 3-minute pitches. And then we had an event where they essentially presented to members of public affairs and we had a winner and that sort of thing. And everyone started talking about what a great idea, teaching people how to do these elevator pitches. And then, so we started talking about it as a Krembil event, and then we thought, wouldn't it be great if we broadened it out, to all of UHN research, and it just turned into this, it went from an idea to an actual event very quickly. But what it ended up being was a one-night event on October 16th, I think, 2019. And we had a keynote speaker, Andre Picard, the health columnist from the Globe and Mail. And we had 7 UHN researchers that Twain and I and other members of public affairs worked with in order to help them create what ended up being sort of like a TED Talk. So taking a part of their research and creating a story around it, not only with their words and with their presenting, but also with the visuals that they used. And it was a real process. So from the beginning slide deck that they came up with, because we said to them, we don't want charts, we don't want graphs, we want you to tell a story about your research. We want you to engage these audiences. We want them to understand who you are as well as a person. And we want everyone to leave understanding what you do and why you do it and remembering about that. So Science in the Six was really an event that we hope to recreate again at some point, because we had such great feedback. But the whole idea of it was just turning scientists and researchers into science communicators and helping them get the word out about their research in a compelling, engaging way to a wide audience. Twain?
Yeah, that's basically how they captured the gist of it. And I think it was really successful. And if you do watch the presentations, which I encourage you guys to do, then you can sort of pick up a few things that some of the speakers, kind of in the way they kind of told their stories, and maybe that'll offer some insight into how you guys can tell your stories and pitch your research and things like that in an easy and understandable way.
Yeah, and it really turned Twain and Carly and I into a bit of a production team, and we went and filmed and interviewed and edited, and really it was so great in that we got to meet so many people and travel across UHN to be able to do this kind of thing. But I really think it tapped into something that resonated with a lot of people, which is that storytelling in science is hard. It's not easy, and it's a process, and it was really fun. And I think that it's something that we definitely want to do again. But it's great in that it lives on both UHN's and Krembil's YouTube. And so you can go and watch the full event, or you can just watch the vignettes and the presentations for each person.
Amazing, thank you. Well, that concludes today's session. I've just placed I've just shared my screen of all of the upcoming topics that we have, starting with next week, which will be an introduction to Instagram that Twain will be leading. And then since there's so much interest in Science in the Six, you can learn how to craft your own elevator pitch or TED Talk style presentation on July 3rd with Heather. So I'm just going to send it back to the two of you for closing remarks. Thank you.
Great. Twain, do you want to start?
You can go ahead.
Well, thank you, everybody. This was a bit of an experiment today. We have, Twain and I get a lot of questions from people on different topics, and so we thought we would just take a week and try to address some of those questions directly. So we really appreciate your participation and your feedback and your questions. We are available to help you. So if you have questions, if you have things that you want to run by us, certainly, you know, we're here to help you promote your research and get the word out about it. So we hope you enjoyed today. Hope you have a great weekend, and thank you very much. Look forward to see you on Zoom next Friday.
Yes, and actually, I completely forgot about our mug drawing. Thank you
Oh
for
my God.
the reminder. I know, we just got so invested in with these questions. So Amy, do we actually have that draw ready?
We do, and the drawer is also ready. So she's pulled out a name. Oh, unfortunately, I don't have a name. It's a TID based on the individual's Zoom login. So the TID or the ID, perhaps it's a Zoom ID, is T47FP8B. And I believe the individual may have already signed off. This individual was here earlier. I saw the name. So we will be reaching out and letting him or her know that they've won a Krembil mug.
Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks for coming. And
have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend.